Hello, I'm Sebastian Michael, and this is this Saturday's sonnet. For shame deny that thou bear'st love to any, who for thyself art so unprovident. Grant, if thou wilt, thou art beloved of many, but that thou none lovest is most evident. For thou art so possessed with murderous hate, that 'gainst thyself thou stick'st not to conspire, seeking that beauteous roof to ruinate, which to repair should be thy chief desire. Oh, change thy thoughts, that I may change my mind. Shall hate be fairer lodged than gentle love? Be as thy presence is, gracious and kind. Or to thyself at least kind-hearted prove. Make thee another self for love of me, that beauty still may live in thine or thee. This is sonnet number 10, a sonnet that marks a caesura, I would argue. I think what we experience here in number 10 is a real key change. We have to be a little bit careful when we say things like there's a key change, because this is not, after all, a piece of music where the composer actually puts a key signature at the beginning and we know exactly what key the piece of music is to be presented in. This is a sonnet with no key signature, it's just the words. But the words, as we know, tell us a great deal, and they tell us more and more, and I think there is a key change signalled in these words here as they are. But I do put a caveat here to say we need to be a little bit careful, because if you say the wheels in the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round, and you say, well, there's a key change, and you go, the wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. You immediately have a sad tune, and you could argue, well, there's a key change, and now this is a sad ditty about the futility of existence. But it's not, it's just that somebody has decided to put it in a minor key. So we need to be a bit careful what we see, what we read into these poems, that they are after all. But bearing that in mind, our approach is to listen to the words and only really to the words. Our approach is to assume we know nothing and see what the words tell us. And here, this sonnet number 10 gives us something new. Something new which is of great interest if you are interested in William Shakespeare, because it gives us the poet himself. He introduces himself. This is exciting in the extreme, because up until now you will have noticed that he doesn't mention himself at all. He's talking up until now in more or less generic terms, in more or less generalizations, poetic generalizations, metaphors and all manner of things that illustrate the necessity for our young man to get on, get married and produce a son. And the poet invokes all manner of tools that he has at his disposal to illustrate the necessity and to demonstrate to the young man how much he'll benefit from doing so, how foolish he is for not doing so, and for refusing, quite apparently, to do so. Now something totally different happens, because now the writer changes the vocabulary. And not only does he change the vocabulary, he changes the perspective from which this poem, which is only the 10th in the series, and still does exactly the same thing as all the other ones have done, but it changes the perspective from which this comes. It now comes from me. I, the poet, am now in the poem. I figure, I make my presence felt here. This could, of course, be a coincidence. Many things that we read in these sonnets could be, in theory, a coincidence. It could be the case that this just so happens to be. But if it isn't a coincidence, then it amounts to a meaningful signal, an indication that something is happening, something has changed. And it would be a reasonable question to ask, what's changed? Why, up until now, was the poet content to take a distanced view of the youth and talk about him in more or less abstract terms, and use the language of poetry and use similes and metaphors to urge the young man to get married? And now he doesn't. Now he says, I am in this too. I have a vested interest. I am investing an interest in this. I think that if it's not a coincidence, then it is a key change. It could be a coincidence, but we are talking about William Shakespeare. We're talking about a writer. Now, I'm approaching this from a writer's perspective, and to me, as a writer, it seems inconceivable that this is just a coincidence. Incidentally, this question of what is likely and what isn't, this comes up over and over again. You will hear me say this a lot. You will hear me say things like, we simply don't know because we simply don't know, and you will hear me say things like it is likely or it is unlikely, or ask the question, is it likely? And I would argue, because I think it is reasonable to do so, that in the face of uncertainty, likelihood is your friend. If you do not know because you have no evidence, then going with what seems to be the most likely situation or the most likely outcome or the most likely set of circumstances is not a silly thing to do. It's an instinctive and a survival instinctive thing to do, and it's a reasonable thing to do. This does not mean that something that is extremely unlikely could not be absolutely the case. We know that sometimes the most extremely unlikely things turn out to be the reality or the truth, such as a reality or a truth can be defined. But in the absence of any strong evidence to the contrary, it is wise and sensible and reasonable to go with the most likely scenario, the most likely set of circumstances. And I'm inclined to do that. I believe that in the face of uncertainty, likelihood is your friend. And I embrace this friend. The more unlikely a situation is, the more compelling the evidence really would have to be for it to compel at all. So what does it mean? Sonnet 10. For shame deny that thou bearest love to any, who for thyself art so unprovident. For shame is an exclamation. But you see it written with an exclamation mark, you see it written with a comma. It may mean shame on you, or how dare you, or it's an expression. Deny that thou bearest love to any. Deny that you do not bear love to anybody. This any is I think, a slightly abridged version. I think we miss in modern English a not. Deny that you do not love anybody. Deny that this isn't so, that you love that you don't love anybody. Deny. So the sense is, try and deny that you have no love for anybody. Who for thyself art so unprovident, who doesn't even look after your own best interest. So you don't even love yourself. Grant, if thou wilt, thou art beloved of many. Yeah, accept it. Yeah, it may well be so that you are beloved of many. By the way, this is another one of these pointers we have, which we sort of mentioned already in episode 1 a bit. We said in episode 1 that the world knows this man, the world being society, the world being London, the world being England. This is another pointer towards this. It's not evidence as such, it's not strictly a proof, but if thou art beloved of many. Now, of course, it is entirely possible that the stable boy has a lot of people who like him very much because he's a nice guy. But in the context of poetry that's written to a person who can read, and not everybody can read in Shakespeare's day, I think we can assume that we're not talking to the stable boy here much as we like him. This is clearly somebody who's beloved of many in society. This is another pointer that we're talking about somebody who has status and who is regarded highly. Grant, if thou wilt, thou art beloved of many, but that thou none lovest is most evident. I don't need to translate that. For thou art so possessed with murderous hate that 'gainst thyself thou stickst not to conspire, because now this is interesting, because for the second time in a row we have the word murderous here. I think we can afford to take this with a pinch of salt. This is clearly hyperbolic. In a moment, Shakespeare is going to say something entirely different about this young man. you are possessed with murderous hate. In sonnet number 9, just a moment ago, he said, he ended with the notion of murderous sin that self-love is. And this clearly, by the way, in sonnet 9, is most likely something of a pun, something of a double meaning. Shakespeare is fond of his puns, and we can probably think that the murderous sin that somebody who loves himself, especially a young man who loves himself too much, commits is a physical sin, not just an emotional sin. But there we have the word murderous, and we have no reason otherwise to assume that Shakespeare is being particularly pompous or particularly sanctimonious. And here we have murderous hate. I think he's being a little bit hyperbolic and probably a little bit ironic with this. And that throws up an interesting additional question, which we're not going to answer just yet, but it throws up the question, why does he do that? It's interesting. Murderous hate, that against thyself thou stickst not to conspire, that you don't contend yourself, you don't just conspire against yourself, seeking that beauteous roof to ruinate. You go further, you not only conspire against yourself, you go as far, you intentionally seek to ruinate the beauteous roof, the roof of the metaphorical building that is the house of whoever this young man is. And this is the strongest evidence we have so far. This is almost I think we can say now proof. This is a very, very strong indication that this young man has a house, he has a name. Not a house in a physical, he has a physical structure, yes, but he has a house, he has an estate, he has a family name to continue to maintain in this, and this is what he says, seeking a piece which to repair should be thy chief desire, which to keep in good repair, which to maintain should be thy chief desire. So your principal desire, your principal intention should be to keep your house, your family name in good repair, maintain it. It also incidentally hints very strongly at the incredible importance that the young man has in this family. Because if this were the youngest of 3 strapping lads, all of whom have it within them for their loins to sprout branches of this family tree, then maybe the pressure wouldn't be quite so great on this young man. But this young man is charged with taking this on, this particular task. It should be his chief desire. Oh, change thy thought, that I may change my mind. And here is where the key change comes. Here is not change your thought so that the world can view you in a better light, not so that thy mother can love you better, not so that your father will be pleased. Change thy thought that I may change my mind. The significant thing here, of course, is that it's me. I'm in the poem now. I'm here. Shall hate be fairer lodged than gentle love? Should it be the case that hatred against yourself and against your house, your family, your name, could it be that hate is in this most beautiful of all bodies, of all faces? What I'm saying here is you are the most beautiful person, and if you harbour hate, if you are the lodgings of hate, then because nobody else is more beautiful than you, then anybody else who may be lodging love cannot be as beautiful as you, and therefore hate is fairer lodged than love. Shall hate be fairer lodged than gentle love? Be as thy presence is, gracious and kind. Be as you present yourself to me. Be as I can see you. Be as thy presence is gracious and kind. This is how I perceive you now. I can see this. There is this in you. There is this grace and this kindness in you. Be like that. Or to thyself at least kind-hearted prove. Or at the very least be kind to yourself and do the right thing by you, by yourself. Never even mind anybody else. Make thee another self for love of me. Create another one of you, create a son, for love of me. for love of me, that beauty still may live in thine or thee, so that beauty will continue to live either in your offspring or in you. Make thee another self for love of me, that beauty may still live in thine or thee for love of me. It is possible, of course it is possible, that he's writing on behalf of somebody else. And there is a very attractive turn of events that is beginning to offer itself, which would in one way or another actually suggest that Shakespeare, up until about now, and maybe even including now, is not writing entirely of his own propulsion. And I don't want to go just too far on that yet, but I don't want to dismiss the idea that Shakespeare starts writing these sonnets at the instigation of somebody else. It is possible that here he is taking on the voice of somebody else for love of me, the person who maybe tasked him with writing these sonnets, or who maybe suggested he write these sonnets. This is entirely possible. What speaks against that is that very soon now the poet features more and more in these sonnets, and there is no suggestion whatsoever that he's writing them on behalf of somebody else. But it's something that we could consider a possibility, and I'm not entirely sure yet just how to handle this. But either way, what is certainly significant is that the perspective changes, and that even if he objectively, consciously is writing somebody else into his sonnet here and is writing in the voice of somebody else, it is nevertheless extremely telling that he does so now, and that he is beginning to put the speaker into the sonnet. Either way, it's a key change. Whatever the significance is, it's a key change, and it is a different kind of sonnet we're in now than the kind of sonnet we were in before. So the question then that immediately presents itself now, after everything we've listened to so far, which is after all only about 10 sonnets, in fact, well, it's 14 sonnets if you take the whole second week into consideration, and there's another one we are just about to also touch on, because we have to, it's so interesting. But the question at this particular moment is, what's changed? Why is Shakespeare suddenly taking a personal interest in the young man? But I think there's another clue in this sonnet, and this is the reason why I think it's particularly interesting. It's an interesting sonnet up to now anyway. This is enough to make it a very special sonnet. But I think there's another clue in this, again strictly from the words. And this little clue is quite a modest one. It seems to be hiding a little bit. And with things that hide themselves away a little bit, we have to be extremely careful, because it is of course the case that if you go looking hard enough, you may find things that actually aren't there. But I think here there is an elegant and modest pointer, little clue, that I would like to at least shine a light on and then see what happens. Not more than that. We're being very careful here. I don't want to make any bold statements yet, because that's just not necessary. But in this sonnet he says to the young man, "Be as thy presence is, gracious and kind." Up until now, we have been hearing about the young man's appearance purely as an image, his looks. It would be no difficulty for a dexterous, skilled wordsmith such as William Shakespeare to continue this and to continue talking in such a way that it is clear to us we're talking about a man's image and the way he looks. And that's what he's been doing up until now. And now, in Sonnet 10, he says, "Be as thy presence is, gracious and kind." Now, presence could probably still be interpreted as appearance. But presence really means more than appearance, doesn't it? It means presence in the here and now. Presence as I see you, presence, appearance, mean, behavior, the way you comport yourself, the way you are. Whereas before, we had no real indication that Shakespeare, the writer, knows this young man very well. He clearly knows who he is. He must know what he looks like. He knows that he looks like his mother. But these are all things that can be gleaned from, for example, a picture. A picture would tell you that. Or seeing somebody at a distance. If somebody's very well known, you might see him occasionally. He might be about. People might know who this man is, and we have fairly well established now that this is a man of status. A young man, a very young man, it has to be said, of status. Be as thy presence is, gracious and kind. Well, now, the writer, Shakespeare, I, the poet, if I'm writing, now I'm writing from my own perspective. I've said, I've asked the young man to change his thoughts so I can change my mind, not the world, I can change my mind. And I'm telling him, be as your presence is, gracious and kind. I now have experience, I certainly now, if not before, maybe before, absolutely possible. But now at the very latest, I, as the writer, have experience of your presence. I know who you are, and I've met you. I know what you're like, really. And your presence is not what your conduct in relation to certainly having children suggests. It's not murderous hatred. I experience your presence as gracious and kind. Now, it would be foolish and hasty in the extreme to say that this is evidence of anything, that this is proof of anything. This is not proof of anything. This is just an indication. It's a signal. It's words. It's words in the poem that are written by a writer who chooses his words. If I wrote a poem to somebody, I would choose my words, and I would choose them carefully. I would choose them particularly carefully if there was any hint of a chance, of a possibility, that this person is of any importance, either to me or to the world in general. And much as we love him, and much as we respect him as a human being, we know that this is not our footman. We have established that. The footman does not have a house, an estate to maintain. The Lord does. The young Lord has an estate, a house to maintain. And so suddenly in this sonnet, number 10, we have two radical changes. We no longer talk about just the man's beauty, the young man's beauty and appearance as a visual thing, as a distanced visual, fairly abstract thing. And we no longer talk in generalities or in fairly sort of generally applicable metaphors about how necessary it is for a beautiful person to produce offspring in order to remain beautiful forever. We now have a poet talking about another person's presence, their grace and their kindness, and that's a key change. It's no more, but it's certainly no less than a key change. And it would be, for me as a writer, ridiculous, it would be preposterous to maintain that this key change is an accident, is not meaningful in one way or another. I think it has a purpose, it has a reason, it has a meaning. Even if it is not the conscious, deliberate intention by the writer, even if I as the writer don't sit down and say to myself, now today I'm going to write a completely different type of sonnet because I feel like it. Even if it's circumstances that prompt me to do so, and I do it subconsciously, it's nevertheless a key change. And if it's a key change, then it's significant because it's a reaction to and the result of something that's happened. I don't want to go much further. There's more to say on the key change, but let's park it here because we're still in this phase where we take things, observe them, and park them, and we'll come back to them. But there's another thing we need to mention before we go, and this is where we parked something last week. You remember when we said that the mother may have some significance in this young man's life, and that this was slightly unusual because we're in a very patriarchal society, and that this could suggest, it doesn't have to, but it could suggest that maybe the father isn't quite as prominent as ordinarily he would be. And here, not in sonnet number 10, but a little bit, just a little bit further down, I mean in the same batch that we've looked at this week, in sonnet number 13. I'm not going to give you the whole thing because it's on there. You can just watch it and read and listen to it. It's part of the series, and it's part of this week. But in there, in sonnet 13, he concludes with the line, 1.5 lines, "Dear my love, you know you had a father, let your son say so." You had a father, not you have a father. Not dear my love, you know you have a father. Apart from the fact that that doesn't have the same ring to it at all. That would be easy to write for Shakespeare. Dear my love, you know you have a father. Remember your father. Be aware of it. You had a father. Let your son say so. Could this be a misprint? Oh, of course it could be a misprint. Could it be a slip of the tongue? It could be a slip of the tongue. These are possibilities in theory. Are they likely? If likelihood is our friend, in the face of uncertainty, what we have is, dear my love, you know you had a father. Let your son say so. You had a father. You do not say to a person whose father is alive and kicking and well and going about fighting wars or trading over the seas or being at court, you had a father. That'd be insulting in the extreme. It'd be simply wrong. Dear my love, you know you had a father. Let your son say so. Dear my love, this is no longer distanced either. This progression from distance to personal involvement has gone a step further. Dear my love, you could argue here, of course, you could say, well, if I go to the newsagent and the newsagent say, thank you, love, you don't immediately assume that the newsagent has an emotional investment in you. No, but the poet here is not a newsagent, and the young man is not nipping down the corner store to grab a packet of fags. This is the writer, the poet, choosing words to address a young nobleman. Dear my love, you know you had a father. Let your son say so. And this renders the pool in which we may go fishing for potential candidates for our young man really rather fathomable. Because in all of England at the time, there are not that many young men who are young enough to be considered young by Elizabethan standards, old enough to go ahead and create offspring, obstinate in their refusal to do so, charged with the responsibility of doing so. At any rate, it is their chief task, it's their chief desire, it has to be their chief desire, whose mother is of some significance. She's certainly there to be compared to, for him to be compared to her in terms of his looks. And he has no father. His father is no more. Remember, love is the power, and see you next week.